Hi everybody, my name's Ronnie. I am, always will be, always have been a real cowboy and a rancher. And so I know a little bit about what I'm talking about here, so and I will, if I get time, answer your questions. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about how the cow camp came to be, how Cowboys came to be, what their jobs and duties were, and the transition from the late 1860s to now. And so anyways, we'll start out in the late 1860s. After the Civil War, the Texans went home after losing. They fought for the Confederacy and they went back to Texas to find the cattle that they'd left there had multiplied and went and started grazing and were just running everywhere without any brands, which is on some of the brands are on the ceiling. And I'll answer your question in a minute, okay? And so they gathered up what is now known as cowboys. They were Native Americans, they were freed slaves, they were young boys about y'all's age, and Mexican vaqueros, and started driving these cattle, branding, catching these cattle and driving them up from Texas to the railroads, and then it would have been eastern Colorado and Nebraska and stuff, Kansas. And the end of the tracks just kept moving westward. This was still what they considered Indian territory. So there wasn't any cattle here yet. But after the Meeker Massacre, they removed the Utes and put them on reservations in eastern Utah and southern Colorado, and opened this up to what they called homesteading. Homesteading was giving somebody 160 acres if they could prove up on it. What prove up on it meant was put a fence around it, whether it be log or I don't even know when barbed wire started. I haven't even looked at that, but they had to fence it, and then they'd build a house and start improving on it, and then they could file on it and start paying taxes, property taxes, which still got to do today. So, anyways, they found out real quickly there was no way you could make it on 160 acres in western Colorado. It's a desert. But they saw all this green grass growing all over this public land that hadn't been taken up by anybody because it was either too rocky or too steep or too high or whatever. So they started bringing in cows. And so they started bringing in more cows. And some people started exploiting it and brought in tens of thousands of head of cows. And pretty soon this place was just overgrazed, overrun, and you know, so we'll jump forward. And then the cowboys that took care of the cattle then slept out under the stars or in a tent that they packed on their pack horse, but they had no permanent place. They were free grazers. They just moved around and pushed their tens of thousands of head of cattle. Whoever could get to the nicest grass the fastest did the best. So they were just following the cows around, basically, and had no permanent housing. And this even happened in the wintertime because they just grazed the valleys in the wintertime. So along comes, so they did that from the late 1870s to 1905. what happened in 1905 was President Teddy Roosevelt showed up here. This is the history according to Ronnie. President Theodore Roosevelt showed up here, went bear hunting south of here. He took a look around and he noticed that this place was a mess. It was bare dirt. You couldn't graze anything. There wasn't nothing left. They were cutting the timber down like crazy, and somebody had to do something. So he went back. He talked to his secretary, because he was a rancher. He went back, talked to his Secretary of Interior, and says, something has to be done. So they developed what is now known as the Forest Service. And one of the first national forests is south of here. Basically where he went hunting. And he sent a forest ranger out here. And his job was to tell them they can't turn their cattle out, and he gave them specific areas they could graze in at specific times, and they started limiting the timber cutting and stuff like that, because it was just deforesting it to the big time, so then the Cowboys became more permanent. They had to stay on the permit that the forest ranger issued to them and tend to the amount of cattle that they were permitted. So they started building what we have here, a cow camp. And they had more than one. They had the spring cow camp and the summer cow camp, but and they moved with the cattle and stuff, and they actually found out they were making more money doing it that way than just out there free grazing, and everything was so skinny when they come back that you sell your cattle by the pound instead of by the head sometimes. So they're getting a lot more poundage off the same ground. So it worked out. They finally got used to the idea, and that's how it works still today. Okay, some of the things that and like I say, I was a cowboy, so I spent my youth growing up in a cow camp in summers, and some of the duties we had to do. Like, I'd get up real early in the morning. My father would get me out of bed. We kept a horse in the corral called a jiggle horse. That horse had the ability to know where the rest of the horses were. And everybody had like 6 head of horses plus your pack strain. So you had, depending on how many cowboys you had, 5, 3 or 4, whatever, is how many horses I had to go round up. Dad would cook breakfast because he was a good cook. And I'd saddle up that horse, or sometimes I wouldn't even saddle him up. I'd just put a bridle on and jump on and go gather. And this was still in the dark. Gather up them horses, bring them back to the corral. Depending on what we're going to do that day, sort out if we're going to spread salt. And what spreading salt meant was you put either bags of salt or blocks of salt on a pack saddle like this on your pack horse. They had canvas panniers that draped on either side. You'd put a block on each side and one on the top. And that's 150 pounds per horse. So that's 3 blocks of salt. And the reason you'd spread salt is to take and spread out your cattle. because cattle crave salt, and they'll go to the ridges and up and down the ridges if you spread the salt on the ridge, and get them out of the bottoms where they like to lay by the water, and so you wouldn't overgraze. It's just a tool you do. How you kept your cattle separate from the other permit holders? The branding iron, the brands. These are local brands. Most of them are from the Divide Creek area. Some of them are